Carl Edwards, in his first press conference in years, clarifies exactly why he left NASCAR when he did. Meanwhile, NASCAR inexplicably continues to keep us in suspense regarding Kyle Larson and a playoff waiver. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Happy Friday. Today, we are wrapping up a busy, packed, tumultuous week of NASCAR news. But before we get started, I want to share this photo. Better times may be ahead for at least one Stewart-Haas racing driver. Chase Briscoe shared this photo of his Panda Express fortune cookie on his Instagram story yesterday. You are next in line for a promotion, with Briscoe saying, yeah, I hope so. Gosh, great timing on that one. I'm not one to put too much stock in what my snack tells me, but hopefully that's a good sign for Chase Briscoe as he hunts down hopefully his next NASCAR Cup Series opportunity. Last week, Carl Edwards was voted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Yesterday, he spoke to reporters for nearly an hour. I believe this was his first official press conference since that infamous day in January of 2017 when he announced his sudden, shocking retirement from NASCAR. I'm going to play a few clips from this interview, adding the proper context, but if you'd like to see the full thing, Front Stretch uploaded it to their YouTube channel. I'll put that link down in the description below. To begin, Carl Edwards says he simply did not expect to get voted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
This honor is over the top. I did not expect this in any way. I was shocked. I actually wasn't available at 4 p.m. when they announced it because I thought there's no reason to be. And it's been a huge deal to me, much bigger than I ever would have expected.
28 NASCAR Cup Series wins, including wins in the Coca-Cola 600, Southern 500, not to mention he won an Xfinity Series championship. Narrowly missed out on Cup titles in both 2011 and 2016. Carl Edwards, to me, is clearly a Hall of Fame talent. But like I said last week, I probably would have waited one more year before voting him in, only because his off-track contributions to the sport have been few and far between. Now, there's no official criteria as to what defines a NASCAR Hall of Famer, but when you hear people at the Hall talk, they always say, hey, we're looking to honor those who helped shape the sport. Carl Edwards was a fantastic race car driver, but I'm not sure he did much to help shape the sport. But to be fair to Edwards, that's something he's clearly very aware of. The self-awareness and self-reflection during this whole press conference was incredible. And you'll hear it several times in these clips. Carl did not hesitate to express immense gratitude for the career he had. Carl was asked about the way he stepped away after 2016. He explained why he's been mostly absent for the past 7 years, but also why he showed up at Darlington last year.
When I stepped away from the sport, it's very hard for me to do, okay? There were so many, and I've learned this is how life works in my world. There are a lot of shiny things out there that compete for attention. There are certain things that if you don't show up, nobody else is going to do. Okay. And so for a large part of my career, I felt like I needed to show up and I needed to be in that seat driving those race cars. I felt like that's what I was supposed to be doing. Around 2015, 16, really 2016 is the first time I looked around and thought, wow, there's some other things that I really need to tend to in life. My family nobody else is going to take my role there. So to be able to step away from something as shiny and as exciting as NASCAR, right? Still to this day, when people call me and ask me to drive race cars, there's like a young man in me that says, this is the greatest thing ever. It's Christmas. They're calling me to drive a race car. If I go down that path, I'm not going to do it halfway. So for me, I had to make a very clean break, and that's just me. I know that was taken by some people as disrespect for the sport. I'm certain it was to some degree. I could have done it better. I wish that part I could do better. But the impetus for coming back was after a number of years, so many people reached out to me. They were so kind to me. And to be honored with something like that NASCAR 75th, or 75 driver program, those were such giant honors. I thought, you know what, I've got to go let people know how much I appreciate this. And so that was the impetus for coming back. But
again, this is a great press conference because you can tell Carl Edwards, he hasn't done this in a while. He's had plenty of time to soak it all in, to process everything, to organize his thoughts, come to terms with how his career progressed and how things ended. Very thoughtful answers to most all of these questions. Now, let's skip ahead a bit to perhaps one of the most interesting moments of this press conference. Carl responded to AP reporter Jenna Fryer's question about why he stepped away from the sport when he did. Jenna Fryer zeroed in on that 2016 Homestead finale, Carl Edwards leading the championship battle with less than 20 laps to go when NASCAR threw a caution for a slow car with a flat tire. Controversial. That, of course, resulted in the infamous restart that led to Carl Edwards crashing out. Edwards was asked point blank if that race had anything to do with his decision to retire, and Carl responded.
Definitely, I would rather not have had a caution come out, but I wouldn't change a thing. Yeah, I think things would have been a lot different if we would have won that championship, and I really like how things have gone since then. So I don't, I wouldn't change it. As far as the bigger picture, though, I mean, I think what you're really asking is, was I very frustrated how NASCAR ran that event? And I could answer that by saying, NASCAR is in the business of creating a sport that serves the fans. And I know from some conversations that were private that NASCAR is doing the very best they can to do that. And I respect that. I just needed time. I realized, I woke up and right towards the end of my career, I realized I'm not spending any time doing really anything other than racing. And that time I never get back. Two, I really felt that I had done everything I personally wanted to do in the sport. We talked about jiu-jitsu. I felt like I was a black belt at racing. I understood basically that I was the best that I could be. And third, I escaped without any big injuries. And the more we looked at that stuff, that's a serious thing. The stuff that Dale Jr. so bravely discussed, the things that NASCAR has been working on lately. I felt like I was very fortunate there. So
there's a lot there. I'm sorry. Going back to the beginning, he's trying to downplay it, obviously, but he does slip that line in there. Things would have been different maybe if we'd won the championship. That's interesting. Look, I'm really not trying to read into something that isn't there. If we take Carl Edwards' comments at face value, he says that race is not the reason he retired. And he reiterated it again later on in this press conference.
I want to be very explicit. I want to say that I did not leave the sport because of the way 2016 ended, period.
Let's add some more context here. Carl Edwards, his wife, is a doctor, and if we time travel back to the year 2016, you gotta remember, that season, Dale Earnhardt Jr. missed the entire second half of the year due to concussions. The world was becoming way more aware of head injuries, the lingering effects, CTE. Around this same time, the NFL was put under a microscope. Carl Edwards says his health was important to him. I think health is a perfectly valid reason to step away from the sport when he did. I don't know anything about his personal life. You don't know anything about his personal life, but when he talks about spending more time with his family, being the husband and father he wants to be, that's admirable as well. There's no doubt in my mind that Carl Edwards would have continued to contend for race wins and championships for at least a few more years had he stuck with it, but that's not the path he chose, and I think you have to respect someone who's willing to make the hard decision, especially if it benefits those closest to you in your life. Really interesting, though, to hear Carl Edwards talk about the past for the first time in a long time. He also addressed the future and said he does not plan to race again, maybe ever.
I did enjoy running the sim a little bit last year, and I think I'm going to go do a little bit more of that just to try to understand. I mean, I love driving cars, and I'm very curious. The reason I don't get into a car now and go do it is because I absolutely respect how tough it is. I know how tough it is. And so to go do it as a fun thing, I have fun personally trying to do very well at things. And so to go do it as a fun thing, I don't think I would be as good as I should be. And second, there's a real risk involved. And, that's one of the things that I think, I touched on a little bit when I stepped away, but it's a serious thing. I mean, the head injuries and the potential for, long-term stuff there, I don't feel like that risk is the best thing for me now.
Could he return to the sport in another capacity? What about broadcasting? Edwards was in the booth for a short stint last year at Darlington.
I think if I were to come back in a regular capacity, what I enjoyed was being up in the booth. I enjoyed kind of calling the race to whatever degree I did there for 45 minutes or whatever. That part I enjoyed. So maybe something like that. But I don't have anything lined up right now, but definitely much more open to that than I ever have been. like I said, I had a good time.
Lots of interesting stuff here. Again, I encourage you to go watch the full press conference. That link is down in the description below. My reaction ultimately, hey, I'm glad that Carl sounds more open to being more active at the racetrack in the NASCAR community, even if it's just for the next year leading up to his Hall of Fame induction. That's great. I like that. But, and I felt this way the entire time I watched this press conference, there's a hint of sadness every time I look at Carl Edwards. I can't shake the what if. Every time I see Carl Edwards, I'm reminded that a NASCAR star in his prime chose to step away from the sport. When I see Carl Edwards, I'm reminded of that disappointing, controversial 2016 finish. I'm reminded of head injuries that many drivers have sustained over the years. I'm reminded of that previous NASCAR era that still included household names like Tony Stewart, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Jeff Gordon, Danica Patrick, my boy, Matt Kenseth. I'm also reminded of NASCAR's inability sometimes to get out of its own way, how they often like to inject themselves into the story. So seeing Carl Edwards back out in public, talking about racing, it puts a smile on my face, but it's kind of a sad smile. If I'm just being 100% honest, let me know in the comment section below if you share a similar feeling. Let me know what you thought of what Carl Edwards had to say again in his first official press conference, I believe, in years, at least at this scale. One final congratulations to Carl for being voted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. It will be cool to see him celebrate on stage next year, part of the class of 2025. With that being said, let's move on. Speaking of NASCAR making themselves the story, reporter Jenna Fryer confirmed yesterday that NASCAR has received an official waiver request from Hendrick Motorsports. But there is no timetable for a decision to be made. Combine that with other posts on social media yesterday. The Couch Racer X account says that the decision is going to go all the way to the top and is not cut and dry. Reporter Jeff Gluck, you can see, is exasperated that it's taken this long for NASCAR to make a call. I know everyone's tired of talking about playoff waivers, but as long as NASCAR continues to drag this out, it's going to be a story. It is one of the top headlines until NASCAR changes that. How about a brief history lesson here? NASCAR has handed out playoff waivers for drivers who they've suspended, drivers who've right-reared others at dangerous speeds. NASCAR has handed out playoff waivers to drivers who've missed up to 11 points-paying races due to injury. See Kyle Busch. They've handed out waivers to drivers who got hurt doing non-racing things. Shoot, NASCAR gave Matt Kenseth a playoff waiver in 2020 despite him not having a ride for the first 4 races of the season. I always try to be fair on this show, and NASCAR does have a valid argument. I know some of y'all don't want to hear that, but they do. I completely understand why NASCAR wants to protect their legitimacy. The Coca-Cola 600 is one of NASCAR's biggest races. It's a crown jewel event. To have your star driver skip that race, miss the start of the 600 to compete in a completely different racing series, that does reflect badly on NASCAR and their championship format. That's valid. I completely get that. But NASCAR should still grant him a playoff waiver. They should have done it yesterday. Like I said earlier in the week, do you really want Kyle Larson's championship run to end in May or June? He's going to win more races this year, likely going to make a deep playoff run. Do you really want the narrative to be, yeah, Larson's having a tremendous year. Too bad he can't win the championship. Do you really want to try and explain that to all your fans, especially the more casual fans? In my opinion, if Kyle Larson is no longer playoff eligible, that puts a big asterisk next to the rest of this season. Why on earth would NASCAR want to hang that over their head for the next 6 months? I don't understand. Here's what NASCAR should do. In my opinion, they should take Steve Phelps, Steve O'Donnell, whoever they have in charge, set them down in a room with Rick Hendrick, Jeff Gordon, Kyle Larson. They should say, hey, thank you guys for doing Garage 56 last year. That was a huge moment for the sport, a huge undertaking for Hendrick. They should say, hey, we appreciate what you tried to do with the double. It was great for both series, great for American racing. It legitimized NASCAR, its drivers, its brand. We're going to grant you a waiver, but if this situation comes up again, we expect you in the future to choose NASCAR. We expect you to prioritize our race, our fans. We expect you to be here. That's what they should do. Boom, done. It's fixed. Sure, would that potentially discourage other drivers and teams from attempting the double in the future, knowing they may not get that same waiver? Sure, maybe, I guess, but again, there's a reason the rule is written so vaguely. Yes, it says a driver must start all 36 races to remain playoff eligible, unless otherwise authorized by NASCAR, which means NASCAR can approach everything case by case. The Indy 500 is one of those few special exempt cases where if a driver wants to go attempt it, it's good for everyone. I think NASCAR would be willing, or at least would be willing to consider looking the other way. If you choose a late model race, a dirt race, a soapbox derby race over NASCAR, then sure, you're not going to receive a waiver. I think that's fair. But we're talking about the Indianapolis 500, one of the biggest races in the world. If there ever was such a thing as a special case that should be otherwise authorized by NASCAR, it's this. Kyle Larson should be granted a waiver right this second, and going forward, teams should just understand that if they're going to attempt the double or another major event like this, they need to be in constant communication. They need to collaborate with NASCAR to make sure everyone's on the same page, everything is properly authorized. The rule has a very open-ended clause in it. I would hate to see NASCAR choose this moment to be stingy, petty, strict with their rules. That would be awful for the sport if they do not grant Kyle Larson a waiver. So I'm hoping they're just holding out to try and send a message that, hey, we don't love that you chose Indy over Charlotte, but hopefully in the end they make the right decision. It's just frustrating that this narrative has lasted all week when it probably shouldn't have. That's all I've got. That's my take. Let me know in the comments below if you agree, disagree. I look forward to reading them. Hopefully we don't have to talk about waivers for much longer. Packed show. I warned you guys. It's been that kind of week. Thank you for tuning in, though. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Helps me out a ton. Subscribe as well if you're new to the channel. More NASCAR content and commentary every single day right here. And a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday. I will see you later this weekend after Gateway St. Louis. 3rd year in a row. Gonna be a good time. Have a wonderful rest of your week, folks.